23 soldiers walked into that temple. None of them came back. The things inside had done this before across planets, across timelines, across thousands of years of human history they hadn't written yet. They didn't convert for hatred. They didn't convert for power. They converted because to them, human beings were simply inefficient, a calculation that needed correcting. They had the math. They had the machines. They had time itself on their side. What they didn't have, what they never once thought to calculate for, was a woman standing alone in a corridor with 4 soldiers and a scanning device, who had already decided that the doctor was going to get his 30 minutes. Even if it killed her. The last transmission from Survey Team Osborne arrived at 3:17 hours, station time. It was 12 seconds long. For 11 of those seconds, there was nothing but static and the faint, wet sound of someone trying to breathe. In the 12th second, a single word. Chrome. Commander Sierra, Vought played it 4 times before she stopped pretending the hair on her arms would lie flat again. Chrome, not the element. Not a color. The name they'd been using, out here in the survey lanes, for the things that had started appearing at the edge of known space 3 months ago. Nobody in the Central Authority liked the word Cybermen. Too old. Too mythological. Too much like admitting you believed in ghost stories told by pilots who'd been flying too long in the dark. Vought believed in them now. The planet was called Kronos in the survey charts, which struck her as either poetic or very bad luck. It sat at the end of a dead-end transit lane, a gray stone thing with no atmosphere worth breathing, and a temple at its heart that the first 2 teams had apparently walked into and never walked out of. The temple itself was older than the survey lanes, older than the Authority, older than recorded spaceflight, older, maybe, than the human concept of something being old. She landed Survey Team 3 on the eastern plateau at dawn, which on Kronos meant a shift in the gray to a slightly lighter gray. 12 people, 8 military, 4 science, plus the 2 she hadn't asked for. You didn't ask for us, acknowledged the larger of the 2 uninvited additions, tugging his long blue coat straight after the landing ramp jostled him. He was a broad man, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had clearly spent decades deciding whether to be amused or deeply annoyed and had settled on doing both simultaneously. He extended a hand before she could tell him to get back on his shuttle. I'm the doctor. That's all the name you're getting. This is Dr. Evelyn Smythe. The woman beside him was somewhere in her 60s, compact and sharp-eyed, with the particular bearing of someone who had long ago decided that the universe owed her nothing and found this freeing rather than depressing. She smiled at Vought like they were meeting for coffee. We had a message, Evelyn said, from someone we trust, said this place needed looking at. This place, Vought said, has swallowed 23 survey personnel in 6 weeks. Yes, the doctor looked toward the temple just visible on the horizon. That's rather why we're here. She let them stay. She didn't know why, exactly, something in the way the doctor looked at the temple like he recognized it, the way his jaw tightened for just a moment before he remembered to look merely curious. She'd spent 15 years reading threat assessments. She knew the difference between someone who was afraid and someone who was managing their fear, and this man was doing the latter with practiced skill. The 4th member of their party she hadn't asked for announced himself an hour after landing. A young man named Goddard, found hiding in the temple's outer corridor when the advance team swept it, who claimed to be a Cyberman expert, and who radiated a specific kind of desperation that Vought recognized from soldiers 3 hours before a battle they didn't expect to survive. The doctor pulled her aside. His comms implant, he said quietly, or rather his lack of one. He has no embedded receiver. That's going to be important. Don't ask me why yet. I prefer reasons before I trust strangers, she said. I know I still need you to trust him. He paused. And me if you can manage it. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back without flinching, without performing confidence, without doing any of the things people did when they wanted her to believe them and didn't deserve it. One question, she said. Go ahead. Have you seen them before, the Chrome? The muscle in his jaw moved again. Yes. Did anyone live? He was quiet for 3 seconds. Some. She nodded, all right. The temple's interior was wrong in ways that took time to articulate. The geometry was right, corridors, chambers, doorways, but the scale was off. Everything slightly too large, slightly too cold, designed for beings that needed 4 centimeters more clearance at the shoulder than a human did. The walls were stone on the outside and something else inside, something that absorbed the beams from their torches and gave back a dull, humming reflection. The air tasted like copper and old electricity. They found the first conversion chamber 40 minutes in. Vaught had read the theoretical briefings. She was not prepared for the actual thing, for the machinery that looked almost surgical, almost medical, until you understood what it was for. Until Private Renew touched one of the restraining brackets and then went very still and said, in a voice stripped of all inflection, that it was sized for a human wrist. They found 7 more. Running low on resources, Goddard said, looking at the machines with the particular revulsion of someone who had studied them in theory and was now calculating how long before theory became practice. That's what the briefing said. Cybermen always adapt, but these ones, they're operating on scraps. Partial conversion. That's almost worse. A fully converted Cyberman doesn't remember. A partial one. Does, Evelyn finished. She wasn't asking. Does, he confirmed. Then we need to move faster, the doctor said. He was crouched at the far wall, examining a panel that looked like stone and was not. His fingers moved across it with the assurance of someone reading a familiar alphabet. This is a temporal gateway. Kronos isn't just a planet, it's a junction. The Cybermen didn't come here for the real estate. They came because from here, with the right technology, you can reach any point in the timeline, any human settlement, any moment in history. He looked up. They're not just trying to survive. They're trying to rewrite the conditions that led to their own extinction. By going back, Vaught said. By going back and converting humanity before it learned how to fight them. The temporal wave hit them at 14:03 hours. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Vaught was in the middle of updating her position log when the air in the corridor shivered like water disturbed by a dropped stone, and then 12 seconds of her memory simply weren't there anymore. Not gone, she could feel the shape of them, like a word she'd forgotten in the middle of speaking. When the world stopped shivering, Corporal Tanaka was standing 3 meters to the left of where he'd been, looking at his own hands with the expression of someone who has just noticed something deeply wrong. Temporal displacement, the doctor said, appearing from nowhere, which was becoming a habit. Minor, local, the gateway is active. We have, he checked something she didn't see, approximately 35 minutes before the next wave. The next one won't be minor. How do we stop it? We go through. The silence was absolute. You want us, Vaught said carefully, to go through a Cyberman temporal gateway. Not all of you, just, he looked at Goddard and something passed between them, something Vaught couldn't read. Goddard and I need to reach the nexus point, the chronosphere. From there I can reset the web of time, seal the gateway, prevent the paradox from propagating. And Evelyn? Vaught asked, because Evelyn had gone very quiet, which Vaught had learned in the past 4 hours meant she was either bored or frightened, and it was clearly not boredom. Evelyn stays here, the doctor said, and for just a moment the management of his fear slipped and the fear itself was visible. It was enormous. It was the fear of someone looking at a calculation they already know the answer to. She and you and your team hold the outer chamber. Give us time. Against how many Cybermen? Enough, he said. Enough that you'll want to be clever about it rather than brave. Vaught thought of something her first sergeant had told her, a lifetime ago, before her first combat drop. The job isn't to not be afraid. The job is to find what the fear is pointing at and figure out whether it deserves the weight you're giving it. Corporal Tanaka, she said. Renew, Chen with me, the rest of you with Dr. Smythe. She looked at the doctor. 35 minutes. 34 now. Then stop talking. He almost smiled. It looked like it cost him something. Then he moved and Goddard followed, and they were gone into the dark beyond the gateway. The Cybermen came from the upper corridors 8 minutes later. There were 9 of them, and they were wrong in all the ways Goddard's briefing had prepared her for, and several it hadn't. They moved without hesitation, without urgency, without any of the biological signaling that told you what something was planning to do next. They had no tells. They had no fear. They had, as far as Vought could determine, no particular interest in the humans beyond their utility as raw material, which was somehow worse than hatred would have been. "Convert them," said the one at the front, which she assumed was the leader because the others moved in response to it. "The woman first. She is compatible." They were looking at Evelyn. Evelyn Smythe looked back at them. She was holding a piece of equipment that Vought had seen her pull from a bag 20 minutes ago, and had assumed was scanning equipment until she noticed how Evelyn held it, with the comfortable authority of someone holding something she'd used before and trusted. "Evelyn," Vought said quietly. "I know," Evelyn said. She didn't move. "I know what you're thinking, and I know what they're thinking, and I know what the doctor is thinking, and I suspect I know what's about to happen to me, and I want you to understand that none of that changes what I am going to do next." "Which is?" "Give the doctor time." She raised the device, "as much of it as I possibly can." The device discharged something that wasn't light and wasn't sound, but which struck the leading Cyberman in the chest and flung it 3 meters backward into the wall. The ones behind it recalculated. She could see them do it, the fractional pause of beings redesigning their approach in real time. And then they split, 2 flanking left, 2 flanking right, and Vought was already moving, already yelling at Chen and Tanaka, already doing the thing she had trained for and hated and was very, very good at. The math of it was brutal. 9-4 in a corridor designed for the defenders. They took damage. Renew's left arm stopped working from the elbow down after the 3rd exchange, and Chen took a blow to the ribs that would need attention, and Vought herself ended up with a gash across her shoulder from a support strut she'd put between herself and one of the Cybermen's limbs. But they bought the minutes. They bought them the way soldiers buy everything, with blood and effort and the stubborn human conviction that the cost was worth it. 19 minutes in, the Cybermen stopped advancing. Not retreating, stopping, as if waiting for something. "Doctor," Vought said under her breath, "whatever you're doing, now would be the time." Goddard came back through the gateway at 22 minutes, alone, bleeding from a cut above his eye. He was smiling, which seemed insane given everything, and then Vought understood why, the smile of someone who has done the calculation and come out on the other side of it. "It's done," he said. "The doctor sealed the nexus. The paradox is," he paused, and something went out of his face briefly like a light being switched off. "The timeline I came from, it's gone. It's been corrected, which means—" "You're still here," Evelyn said. "For now." He looked at her, this woman who'd become the closest thing he had to a friend in the last 4 hours, and he said, very simply, "I'm sorry I brought the virus. I thought I could fix what had been broken. The doctor was right, I made it worse." "You gave us the key to unmaking it," Evelyn said. "That's something." "Is it enough?" She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "I don't know, but I know you tried. That has to count for something, even when the math doesn't add up." The Cybermen around them had gone still. Not deactivated, Vought could see them still processing, still running their endless calculations, but paused, as if uncertain what to convert when the thing they'd come here to prevent had already been prevented. She'd never seen them uncertain before. She found she preferred it to certainty. The doctor came back 9 minutes later, through a section of wall that turned out to have a door in it, which he appeared to have found on the way in and simply not mentioned. He was disheveled and breathing harder than she'd seen him, and when his eyes found Evelyn they stopped moving, and the relief in them was the kind that leaves marks. "Told you I'd fix it," he said. "You told me nothing of the sort," Evelyn said. "You told me to give you time." "Same thing." It absolutely is not. He crossed the chamber toward her, and Vought looked away because some things weren't meant to be observed by strangers. The particular way people reclaimed each other after the possibility of loss. "The gateway," she asked. "Sealed from the Nexus side," the doctor said, not turning around. "The temporal waves will decay over the next 12 hours. Any remaining Cybermen," he glanced at the still-standing machines around the room, "will need to be processed by your authority, which I'm sure will be delightful for everyone." "What about him?" Vought nodded toward Goddard. The doctor was quiet for a moment. "The timeline he came from no longer exists. He does because he was already here when the correction happened. That's a gift. Don't waste it," he said to Goddard directly. "You've been given a second draft. Not everyone gets one." Goddard looked at his hands. The hands of someone who had lived a whole life being remade in metal, who had spent that same life fighting what he'd been made into. Clean hands now, in a timeline where that life had never happened. "What do I do with it?" he asked. "Anything you like," the doctor said. "That's rather the point." They came out of the temple into the gray chronos dawn, all of them, the living and the limping and the one who should not by any temporal logic have existed anymore, but did anyway. The survey teams from the authority would arrive in 6 hours. There would be reports, debriefs, the kind of institutional machinery that ground experience into data and data into policy. Vought would write her report. She would not include the word Cybermen because the authority still didn't like it. She would write Chrome-class threat and temporal anomaly and contained, and all of it would be true, and none of it would explain what had actually happened here. She watched the doctor and Evelyn stand at the edge of the plateau, looking out over the gray stone landscape, talking in the low tones of people who had known each other long enough to have entire conversations in half-sentences. She watched Goddard sit a little apart from them, looking at the sky of a timeline he'd had to earn the right to inhabit twice. She walked over to him. "You're going to feel like an imposter for a while," she said. He looked up. "You sound like you know." "I came back from a mission once that I wasn't supposed to. 3 of my team didn't. For a long time I felt like I'd taken something that belonged to them." She sat down beside him on the cold stone. "I don't think that anymore." "What changed?" "I stopped treating survival as something to justify and started treating it as something to use." She looked at him. "You have a skill set that nobody else in this timeline has. You understand them, the chrome, from the inside. That's going to matter. It's already started mattering." He was quiet for a moment. "You know," the doctor said something similar, in different words. "He strikes me as someone who's had a lot of practice with second drafts." "He is," Goddard almost smiled. "He really is." Across the plateau, the doctor said something to Evelyn that made her laugh, sudden and genuine. The laugh of someone who has remembered that the universe contains humor as well as horror, and has chosen, deliberately, to prioritize the former. Vought thought about her sergeant, about the fear and what it pointed at, and whether the wait was warranted. 23 people had come through that gateway and not come back. She had not been able to return them. She could not fix that, could not repair the hole it left in the accounts of what had happened here. What she could do was make sure the thing that had taken them would not take anyone else. What she could do was sit here, on cold stone, on a planet at the edge of nothing, and tell a young man with a second draft that the draft was worth using. The Cybermen had come here to rewrite humanity out of existence. They had come with their mathematics, and their logic, and their certainty that biological life was inefficiency to be corrected. They had weighed the calculation and found humans wanting. They had not calculated for Goddard, who had refused to be what he was made of. They had not calculated for Evelyn, who had held a corridor with a scanning device and 4 tired soldiers, and given the universe time to fix itself. They had not calculated for the doctor, who understood their technology better than they understood his stubbornness. They had not calculated for Vought, who had learned a long time ago that the job was not to win. The job was to make winning possible for the person behind you. That was what the Chrome never understood. They optimized for the individual calculation. They could not model the human habit of fighting for someone else's outcome. They could not account for love, for loyalty, for the specific absurdity of a woman standing in front of a conversion machine and deciding that today was not the day, not for her, not for any of them, because the doctor needed more time. You couldn't put that in a war machine. You couldn't convert it. You couldn't calculate around it. You could only, in the end, lose to it. Vought stood. Kronos' gray sky was lightening above the horizon, which might have meant sunrise, or might have meant the temporal waves were finally decaying. She decided it was sunrise. She was choosing today to prioritize the former. "Dr. Goddard," she said, "when the extraction ship arrives, I'm filing a request for a new Cybermen specialist position with the Survey Corps. The role would require someone who doesn't have a comms implant." She paused. "It would also require someone who doesn't mind this kind of work." He looked at her. "This kind of work," he said, "is the only kind I know." "Then welcome to Survey Team 3, she said. "We're always in an inferior position when it comes to might." She held out her hand. "But we're very good at life." He took it. Behind them, the doctor had guided Evelyn back toward the ship with the gentle authority of someone who knew better than to argue with a woman who had just held a corridor alone. She was talking. She was always talking, and he was listening, which was, Vought suspected, the real shape of their partnership. She did not hear what was said. She didn't need to. Some things you could see even from a distance. The ship waited. The gray sky held. Humanity had survived another calculation. It was not supposed to win. It always did.